at the American Indian Foundation in the US. Take a look.
You are watching NewsX World, and I have been Thomas Porteous, and we are about to tune in to S. Jaishankar's speech, where he will put India's message at the forefront on the world stage. Of course, we don't know what he is about to say but his meetings previous to this that he has held here in New York can give us some inkling. We can expect him to push for a counter on global and cross-border terrorism. Of course, this has been central to both his BRICS meetings and his foreign ministers' meetings, in which he met leaders from and foreign ministers from around the world. Now, this, of course, can be seen as something that he is sure to bring up due to the issues that India has faced, particularly in the last year in May's Pahalgam terror attack. Now, we move on. Of course, the theme of this year is unity. This institution, the United Nations, can be seen as needing some serious reform. India's bid for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council will also be expected to be voiced, as India, of course, represents the fourth largest economy in the world and is home to 1.4 billion people. So Jaishankar today is expected to champion the global south, in his words, leading forward. Now, of course, development, and we live in a world of conflicts and trade wars. Dr. S. Jaishankar is, of course, expected to speak about these and address them. The Russia-Ukraine war is, of course, ongoing. The Gaza crisis is mounting our social media feeds. These are two topics that have been critical in today's geopolitical climate, and these are also expected to be addressed by the External Affairs Minister. Hello and welcome to NewsX. I am Thomas Porteous, and we have just seen External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar wrap up his speech in front of that General Assembly Hall. He pushed many points, some expected, but that speech certainly was compelling. Spoke for around 30 minutes today. And now we're joined by someone to discuss this and Jaishankar's speech. What is your name and tell us about yourself?
Hey, my name is Abhishek, and I'm very motivated by the speech he has given. I think coming from Indian community, witnessing him to speak, it echoed the thought that India has always represented globally, and what he talked about did touch our heart. The first thing, we have seen what has happened to the terrorism in the global south, and he talked about the neighbor that promotes terrorism and the neighbor that has always been the epicenter of promoting terrorism. And he talked right about that there cannot be diplomacy when the terrorism is happening, and he showed the global south how it has changed over the years and how the voices have come out from the global south that India is echoing across the world. He talked about Narendra Modi being the voice of the global south, and he has always promoted how decolonization would take place in future, which completely connects with the UN reform. UN needs to go ahead and reform itself. He had put highlights on how Africa needs to it needs to come in and get a voice. So all of those points that I feel that echoes the ethos of India, which is to give back to the community, give back to the world. And his speech was very much motivating for us as we echo, even in wherever we are, we echo that thought that we are here to give back to the community. We give the yoga to the world. We give back all the values that the world is seeing. The value of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is family, and listening to him was quite inspiring.
Yes, and what did you make of the tone of the speech? Of course, terrorism, cross-border terrorism, was a huge topic in his speech, but never mentioned Pakistan by name. Of course, it was a reference to multiple times. Comparing that to Shehbaz Sharif's speech yesterday, how did you think that Jaishankar approached the topic and orated it?
Apparently, we do need to take the name of the neighbor. It is very clear. You can see the irony that without even taking the name, it is addressed. So it's very clear who is the one we are directing it to, and we don't even need to direct. It's very obvious.
There was an applause as well in the hall, wasn't there?
Yes, because we as a nation see it. Our aim is to, we are the youngest population ever that has been seen in the history. We are 1.5 billion with a median age of 28, and we want development. We want to go ahead and get prosperity. Terrorism is only agenda of the state that has no economic interest, that has no interest in science and technology, that has no interest in developing its own youth. And the only development they have done is giving the world terrorism. Starting from the biggest terrorist, we are right now in America. Osama bin Laden was there. The most wanted terrorists are there. So it is something which breaks our heart, and there was Indian community applauding for the very reason that we need to end this. We can't be. We saw what happened in the Pahalgam, the tourists, the innocent tourists that were killed so badly, and they were on honeymoon. They were the love was hurt. So the India, which has always been the land of Buddha, the land of peace, getting that kind of terrorism and becoming a victim of it, will always condemn. And that's why the applaud came from the Indian community. And we always promote peace, and we will go ahead and be very vocal against the terrorism, and we will be the face of terrorism across wherever it happens, whether it happened in Palestine or it's happening in Ukraine. He brought in his speech that peace needs to be there, and that echoes the same thought.
Yes, and of course there was also stress that India will continue to make its own decisions on the global stage and won't be pressured by anyone. This can be seen as you will, but of course Donald Trump has been imposing its tariffs for India, making decisions which of course are in its self-interest at the end of the day. What are your thoughts on India, in fact, being self-reliant and Donald Trump seemingly punishing India for that?
Whether I would not say that it is related with one country imposing any tariff. We are not concerned with that. We are concerned with our integrity, territorial integrity, our sovereignty. That matters the most to us. We are a 5,000-year civilization. We know the history. We know the values. We have the intelligence. We have the knowledge. Our people are giving the biggest tech changes. The biggest tech giants are headed by Indians, and there is no way that any other country can come and do it. And not just about India or any other country. He echoed the thought that the time has come that every other country should get a voice. There was a very strong sentiment of decolonization, which was very much visible. Decolonization is the next centuries, or from today onwards, you can say that the UNGA is a turning point, and people will talk about decolonization. It's time we go ahead and set the precedent that the 5 permanent council members, they are not the one who will decide the future. It will be decided by bilateral ties, regional cooperation, every country for its own. So they will go ahead and decide. They will go ahead and defy all that orders that comes as sanctions, that comes as a stick, and try to go ahead and manipulate, or try to go ahead and dominate these countries. And it will happen in Africa. It's happening already in the global south. It's happening everywhere else. And India, and the Prime Minister, he quoted Prime Minister, has been a vocal voice in that. So that is something which is very set precedent for India. We will not go ahead and take any order. And also, I would just like to highlight, it's a very old policy for us, non-alliance. We did not take part in the non-alliance. We have never been in the divide of West and Russia or America or Russia conflict. We are very clear. We are for peace. We are for the reforms, and we want to go ahead and every country, smaller countries, to have their own distinct voice, because these are countries with very old tradition. Just like India, we have a civilization that has been for 5,000 year old, and we can't go ahead and take someone who comes us and dictates us. We have not taken that from China. We have not taken that from Russia or any other country that comes us and tells us that what we need to do. We know how to run the business. We know how to go ahead and run the civilization. We know how to manage our people. We know how to do trade. The Silk Route or the trade route has been the oldest trade that has been colonized by the West. So we know how to do trade. It's just these countries coming. This is a way to go ahead and show that we are the big boss, and we're not going to take that answer.
Yes, and just finally, what we'll just touch on is that UN Security Council reform that was spoken about. In fact, the UN having teeth has been a huge issue here. Has been a huge point of contention. Even the UN itself knows it needs reform. In fact, after all, it is 80 years old. What were your thoughts about the representation that now needs to be shown in the United Nations?
I feel there is no reform that is going to happen. Okay, we need to reform it. That's what India also thinks, because the way it has been designed, the fundamentals of United Nations have been to give veto powers. That goes against the whole value of we the people. So it's a conflict, it's a contradictory statement when we talk about we the people and then you give veto power to the 5 countries. So the UN reform would go ahead and take place where every country gets equitable proportion and they get a distinct voice. You can't be having one country who just veto all the rights of the other countries. We have seen what's happening in Gaza, we have seen what's happening in Ukraine, we have seen what's happening in Sudan and all the other countries. Take example of Haiti also. Like, all the countries have been dominating the other smaller countries and they don't have a voice. UN need to think about it. It need to reflect deeply in how it is addressing those humanitarian issues. And if people have lost faith in it, if the smaller countries though have lost faith in it, the biggest reason is that they have been structurally designed in a way to go ahead and help those powers that have used it and exploited it against the other small nations. And that's the biggest concern we have. And in going ahead in future, we will see that if there is any UN or if there is any agency that is there existing to bring the global coordination, that has to keep these things in mind, that you can't go ahead and give power, absolute power to some 5 other countries. Just for example, India has the almost 1/6 of the world's population right now, and we don't have the veto. So the 6 countries should have ideally been the India, but they never gave it. So now we are not talking about being the 6th member, we are talking about all the other countries. Almost the whole East can constitute of 60 to 70% of the population. We need to talk about those smaller island countries, small countries which have never been represented, historically marginalized.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to speak to you.
Same, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, there we have it. As Jaishankar just wrapping up his speech there in that Grand Assembly Hall, and we will, of course, bring you more updates from here in New York. Hello, I'm Thomas Porteous, and you join us live here on NewsX from New York City. Now, we have just watched the conclusion of Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar deliver that speech on the podium at the iconic United Nations General Assembly venue. Now, Jaishankar received a huge applause as he entered that podium, and it started with the same, his speech. The foundation of the United Nations, which marks 80 years today, and the realities of what 2025 brings and its vision and how it reflects today. Of course, with decolonization in 1945, the world began to reflect its natural diversity, but the UN has not lived up to its full expectations since then. He highlighted conflicts like Ukraine and, of course, the ongoing Gaza humanitarian crisis, of course, 2 focal points of this year's conference here in New York. Another central point to the United Nations as a whole is tackling climate justice. S. Jaishankar highlighted that. He, of course, said, and I quote, "If climate change itself is questioned, what is there hope for climate justice?" Now, of course, a criticism of the United Nations. One leader in particular got up on that stage and criticized climate change, the whole idea of it, as a quote-unquote con job. And he once again reinforced India's messaging behind that and the work that it puts into tackling climate justice. Now, sovereignty and collective threats is also something that S. Jaishankar touched upon during his speech, and he says that the United Nations General Assembly meets as sovereign individuals. He said that countering terrorism is a particular priority. Of course, this follows May's Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor between India and Pakistan earlier on this year. And he said that India, since it has declared its independence, has tackled the issue of terrorism since its very foundation, and that is due to its quote-unquote neighbour being the epicenter of terrorism. He, of course, did not mention Pakistan by name in a softer tone. This contrasts with, of course, Shehbaz Sharif's speech yesterday, which was much more direct. Without naming of Pakistan, he argued that decades and decades of major attacks can be traced back there. Now, in response to this, he saw a huge applause, not just from the Indian delegation, where 26 innocent civilians lost their lives in that terror attack. He warned, and I quote, "Those who condone nations that sponsor terror will find it comes back to bite them." This, a warning to Pakistan and that those who make alliances with them, that Pakistan could, of course, not be trusted. You can take a look at Donald Trump's meeting with Shehbaz Sharif yesterday, which was a closed-door meeting, of course. But S. Jaishankar today said that those who condone it and glorify it, known epicenters of terrorism, should and not be taken forward and make alliances with. Now we move on to multilateralism. Of course, this has been in question throughout the entirety of this summit. With the world forever polarizing, multilateralism has been a hard idea to grasp for some countries. Some countries here have stressed that unilateralism is the way forward, and it's hard to see the world heading in anywhere different. However, there has been many countries here stressing that the United Nations needs reform in order for multilateralism to work, in order for this body, the United Nations, to work. And S. Jaishankar backed this idea. He says the United Nations remains gridlocked, especially when terrorism remains violating human rights, and it erodes trust in this multilateralism that is sought so hard after. Reform is most urgent, and of course he says that most members desire change, and he also cited the historical injustice that has been done to Africa and their lack of seat and representation. One of the 7 continents on Earth does not have a permanent seat on the Security Council, along, of course, with South America. What he also did mention, which often goes unnoticed, is that, of course, India's global contributions. There has been, with the rise and climate change disasters increasing, there has been a dire need for humanitarian assistance across the world. S. Jaishankar cited 19 different countries where Indian humanitarian aid reached, including Myanmar and Afghanistan, where there was recently very devastating earthquakes. He says that India calls for an end to hostilities and for an end, and that supports any initiative that restores peace. He is, of course, there talking about conflicts in Ukraine, in Gaza, and all global conflicts. Often these African conflicts don't get the media broadcast that they deserve. Of course, huge problems going on there. He finalized his speech with summing up India's domestic transformation. Of course, India now the 4th largest economy in the entire world. He stressed the transformation under the Modi government, the digital infrastructure, the microfinance reaching millions of people with its UPI system, and the culture of innovation that is reshaping India as a country. And he said that, of course, this emerging force that is AI will be a force for good. And I quote, he said, India will harness AI responsibly for human welfare. And he then finished those comments with the fact that India will host this global AI summit in the year of 2026. He finished quite poetically, actually. He outlined these three concepts, one being self-reliance, and saying that developing national capabilities and nurturing domestic talent. Now, of course, India's educational enterprises and industry has grown vastly in the last decade under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and of course many thanks to its hugely young population, which is once again, as I emphasize, growing with the times. Second of all, he says security, protecting Indian citizens at home and abroad. Of course, Operation Sindoor in last May emphasizes that. The way that was conducted, precise, was very much in India's interests and working to international law and a just response to what happened in Kashmir on that day. And finally, he finished it with the self-confidence that Indians, he says, need to feel. That confidence in India's identity and choices, ensuring that it will always be a voice for the global South. And his closing note, he said that multilateralism is the only viable path. Now this, of course, a crucial one. He said that India will do its fair share and more in building a fairer and more global order. Now, of course, a hugely and compelling speech there by the External Affairs Minister, truly putting India's message to the world on the global stage here in New York. And that concludes our analysis of that speech. And we were watching it live here in New York.